This podcast has never been about trying to throw up subject to get people to find me controversial. But there is a line that's being crossed over and over and over in the body of Christ. They cross into the crime zone, and the voice of victims everywhere need to be heard.
The church has a hard time separating sin from crime. And he was like, hey, there's something I need to tell you. Last summer, while we were on that trip in San Diego, I felt so guilty, so I confessed to Brian. And we all decided that we weren't going to tell you or your family.
If word got out, the whole edifice would come crashing down.
What makes me sad about a lot of it is...
Hey everybody, this is Rita Springer. Welcome to the Rita Springer podcast, and worship is my weapon. This podcast today, in all honesty, is probably one of the hardest that I've done. I am not a real big controversial person. And in fact, I know in podcasting and trying to get viewers and all kinds of stuff that you got to do to get viewers, whatever. I understand it. I get it. I just am not, this podcast has never been about trying to throw up subjects to get clicks or to get people to find me controversial. I think other people that do that, I think that's great for them. I don't feel called to that. I don't feel like that's what the Lord's asked me to do with this particular podcast. My heart is to shed light on things that need to be shed light on, have honest conversations, and talk truth. Just be really honest about life and sometimes how life feels, and really as it relates to our faith and this big thing that I really love called the church. I know that I've said it on here before, where I have described an encounter I had very young as a worship leader in my 20s, coming into a rehearsal very early one Sunday morning while I was living in Seattle many, many moons ago. And I felt God just say to me, to be very cautious and careful, never to become angry at the church and walk away from her. And I thought that was kind of an interesting conversation to start the day out on a Sunday morning at about 7:00 a.m., walking into church for rehearsal. And I just went down that trail with him. And I was like, what's going on here? And he just said, there will be many, many reasons that you will gain in ministry to walk away from the institution of the church, from the building of the church, from what we know as church. There'll be many human reasons. Humans will give you every reason in the book to walk away from this thing we call the church, whether it's the building or whatever. But most of us realize that our disdain and our disappointment with the Lord really kind of has, for the most part, the faces of other people in the church that have wounded us or hurt us. And God kind of gets the bad rap for that. I understand even the journey of that. And I do understand the angst sometimes when we talk about really tough subjects, even of late. You can't really be in the church right now or in ministry in the church right now and not be very aware of almost like it feels like a season of everybody falling, like a season of, I've heard some people say, God's cleaning out the church. He's cleaning it out. It's always a certain amount of time, and then God starts cleaning the church. And what they mean by that is that what we're hearing in the news, a lot of like just epic church fails and mega churches that are coming under scrutiny because of sins and certain things that are going on that have been held secret for a long time. And I really think that those things, as tragic as they are a way of God doing something new in us. And I think repentance is always a good thing, right? It's always a great thing. I also am very aware of the human quality of who we are in our humanity and how we're prone to sin. The Bible's very clear. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I actually have a lot of patience for sinners. I have a lot of patience even for Christians or faith-filled people who are caught in adultery or caught in, just addictions and certain things like that. I have a lot of grace for people in their journeys to redemption. But there is a line that is becoming so very apparent that's being crossed over and over and over and over in the body of Christ and in church leadership, where what is very, very difficult to talk about and very difficult to actually get through the weeds of is crimes that happen under the ruse or under the banner or the canopy of the church. And I think that has really, for me, been the hardest thing to really have conversations with the Lord about, because while I understand that sin is sin, there are certain sins that cross the lines of being legal, not just right, but like they cross into the crime zone. And it's been kind of appalling to read the stories and to process as a Christian, as someone who loves ministry and loves the church, how people get away with this and why on earth man thinks that God's okay with any of it. And I know I've talked to so many people too that have walked away from the church because of certain things like this, whether they're victims themselves or they just walk away from God altogether because of these kind of heinous acts that happen in the walls of our churches, which should be our safe houses. And today's conversation is another story like this that I just think it needs to be told. And I think there is a season that we are in where I think that the voice of the victim and the voice of victims everywhere need to be heard louder than they've ever been heard before. And that is why I feel like this podcast that we're about to do, very hard in the subject nature, but I think it's really needed. So I want to kind of just put that out there in the beginning of this. This isn't a easy subject to talk about. Sexual abuse in the church is not an easy subject to talk about. And I want to just kind of warn those of you maybe that this might be a trigger for you. If this is something that you've endured or you have been through something under the canopy of the church, which should have been your safe place. Leaders and ministers should have been your fathers and true mothers. And so I just want to say, if this subject is too hard for some of you because it brings up triggers, I just want to kind of warn you now that this subject today that we're talking about is sexual abuse in the church and how churches can cover that up. I also just want to point out that, again, this is people doing bad things, people that say that they believe in God and love God, and they may very well love God, but these are crimes against young people, crimes against minors, and I think that it's very important to let the victims speak. And so we're going to do that today in this podcast on Worship is My Weapon. My guest today is a dear, sweet, I'm not going to call you old friend because you're so young, but Tyler Bates. I've known you probably since, I want to say 2012.
Yep.
But I maybe we didn't start communicating and hanging out or getting to know each other until maybe 2013.
Yeah, you moved to Dallas, and there was a group of us that were part of.
Did you help me move in?
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
And so we were unloading your heavy truck and I just remember texting Connie, who at that time we were just dating. I was like, her furniture is amazing.
Oh my God.
Because you had all those like big pieces.
Oh
and
yeah.
So big pieces, and
that was actually quite a mind blowing experience for me too. I hate moving. Moving's like,
Yeah.
I literally, if I were to want to go on medication,
Yeah, it would be
just the
because
thought
of-
of moving would put me on medication. And it's just so hard for me, just chronically because of my back and stuff. So to move all the way out of another state to that state, but then to show up, my semi truck shows up, and Elena Moore
Yep.
had coordinated all you youths,
Young whippersnappers.
snappers to meet that truck, and you guys had me unloaded and set up in about 3 hours. And
fun.
I'd never in my life had anybody be so kind. So I didn't quite know what to do.
Yeah.
So, but that was my first introduction to you.
Yes.
You were dating Connie at the time.
Yes.
A couple years later, you got married.
Yep.
And we hadn't had like big conversations. I think the thing that struck me about you and Connie, because I was at that point really kind of like always looking around for creatives. Like I wanted to be around creatives, and I wanted to find out who, at Gateway was like the creatives. And you and Connie were always like the ones that stuck out, because you took children's curriculum to a whole different level. And here Justice was 7 when we moved. So he was a part of the wacky weeks that you guys did, and all of the stuff that you guys were really responsible for at Gateway. And Gateway did everything with excellence. So you guys pulled off a show. I'll never forget the Wacky Week. Wacky Week, just for people's reference, was like the Vacation Bible School of all vacation.
On like steroids.
On steroids.
Like, yeah.
And you wanted your kids to go 5 days. It was 5 days, right? Monday through...
It was 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
But you dropped your kid off.
Yep.
And they had the time of their life. And you guys always had the big theme. I remember the pirate theme.
Yeah.
And the big pirate ship on that massive stage. And then because I was on staff, I could kind of sneak in. And I just was stunned. I remember just watching the rubber balls or the beach balls fly all over with like 4,000 to 5,000 kids.
Yeah.
And just being stunned at the creativity of what you guys were able to pull off. So you guys were always kind of like this, those guys are the coolest guys in the whole world, because your ideas were amazing. I think I did some video shoots with you. I don't remember all of what we did, but you guys were always shooting something creative and doing something. And you're engaged to be married and just got married, and you were in my office, and you just told me this horrifying story.
Yeah.
That I almost couldn't even believe. I couldn't, for me, I think I keep an element of myself innocent. I really try to with regard to the church. Because I really believe for the best in the house of God. I always want to believe for the best. And it always makes me emotional talking about it, because I really believe that God wouldn't say that he's coming back for something that he doesn't feel is redeemable.
Correct.
And I was always stunned by your verbiage in even recounting the horror of your abuse in the church, not Gateway, but another church. But I have always been so like, wow, this kid has every reason to flip the bird and walk away. But you and your wife, Connie, have such a deep love for what God loves. And especially kids in the church. Yeah. And so, I mean, this is your story to tell. You've never publicly.
No.
It.
We have close friends and people, like we've told, but I've never told, and I don't know if I've ever told it in the fullness of like, there's kind of how it unfolded and it's been unpacked.
Yeah.
But, cause it's personal, and it took years, and I'll get into it in a bit, but, I was told from the church that this happened at, like, hey, this isn't your story. Wow. This isn't, it's not yours. This doesn't affect you. This doesn't. And I walked around
that's
like that.
Insanity.
It's great. Oh yeah. But I didn't know when you grow up at a church for 18 years, like that's how long I was there before I moved away. You have an expectation that those people have your best interest at heart.
Of course.
So when they tell you something, it's like, well, yeah, of course. Yeah, it's not my story. It's not. And
Yeah.
I think we ended up telling you because Connie had also just walked through a double mastectomy.
Yeah. At 22?
At 22. And you
Right
were like...
after you got married. That's what you came
right
home
after,
from.
oh yeah.
From your
And
honeymoon.
you sat us down in your office and we're like, how are you guys doing? We're like, actually, it's been a
Yeah.
crazy 2 weeks. And you're like, what happened? So we tell you, and like, I think that was also one of the first times we had like vocally out loud kind of like laid out, this is
Yeah.
where our life is at. And you were so sweet and kind. And we're like, you responded in a way that I think even gave us permission to be like, oh, this is kind of there's a lot of moving pieces in our life right now. But it's been years and years of just walking that out. So
I know I'm trying to recall, I felt super angry. Because kind of that mom thing, that
Yep.
mama bear thing. I mean, it's one thing to talk about a cancer diagnosis and being so young.
Yeah.
And then when you said this story, I was like, take him down. Like, I was like, we're going for the justice. I mean, because there is Tyler, the injustice and
Yeah.
the silencing of you as a victim was just insensitive.
which is hilarious if you know my wife, Connie,
Oh.
who is like black and white, justice driven.
Oh,
like,
man.
And she'll march up a
Nothing gets
mountain
by
for
Connie.
any injustice.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you could tell her that your landlord is trying to kick
she'd
you
be
out.
knocking on the
Oh yeah,
landlord's
she'll
house.
she'll march up any hill for you. But the fact that that's who I married and God brought me together
yeah.
with, it's one of the greatest gifts that God has ever given me.
Yeah.
Because like I didn't know I needed a voice, and like
And most victims don't.
and they don't.
Yeah.
And my wife from the so Connie and I met in 2011, and I had grown up at a church in Houston, like it just Grace Church off of the freeway in South Houston. And I had, my parents started going there before I was born.
Yeah.
Knew the pastor well, like one of his grandsons was one of I have a twin, Dylan. And his kids were some of our best friends. And my parents trusted, his name was Steve. They trusted him so much. So I grew up in this house, and I loved it because I was homeschooled. So I was the oldest of 6 kids.
Yeah.
And I got really involved at church at a young age. Like we were just one of those homeschool families. Like our community was church.
Yeah. And ministry's in your blood.
It is.
Yeah,
It
it's
is.
who you are.
It is. And so when Dylan made All-Stars, we were 11 years old. Dylan made All-Stars in baseball, and I didn't. It was one of those moments in life where it's like, I don't think I'm going to be a baseball player, so
Right.
I'm going to start interning at the church. So on Wednesdays, I would intern in the kids department. On Thursdays, I would intern in the worship department. And I did that from the time I was 12 till, 18. I don't know. But my family was so intrinsically involved with that church. And like through 13, 14, 15, 16, I started helping the church create a performing arts for kids. So we had this group, and we would teach songs, all these different tiers, and it was fun. It was great. And what I loved being involved with it, and the guy that they brought in to run that, he was a Dallas guy, moved down to Houston. He was I think he was 8 years older than me. And he kind of took me under his wing and was like, hey, you're going to help me build this. And so...
Which for a young teenage,
for sure.
creative
it's like,
musician,
great, let's go.
Songwriting. Yeah.
Yeah. And we did. Like it was awesome. We built it to be this thing where in the summers we would throw these camps, these performing arts camps, where we'd have 1,000 kids show up from the week.
Wow.
And we would do it for free. So like you had these kids that were like just couldn't afford bread, but like they'd show up, at your camp, and we'd teach 1,000 kids how to sing, how to dance, and how to perform. And then we do a big show at the end where we invite all the parents, and it was fun. And then from that group, we had like a smaller group, like 5 of us. We would just travel around and do different. That's how other than having family that lived in Dallas that went to Gateway. That's how I got involved at Gateway before I lived in Houston. Gateway's in Dallas. The group of 5 of us, we would travel up to Gateway and perform in the kids ministry. And so we would also just go and do like different summer camps at like church conferences and stuff like that. While the parents were doing their conference stuff, we would take all the kids and have
did that too. Yeah.
And so I did that. It was something I loved doing. Like I genuinely loved doing it. And then when I turned 18, I graduated. I moved to Nashville for 6 months, and I played Larry the Cucumber on the VeggieTales Live.
That's right. I forgot about your VeggieTales rules.
If you Google or you on YouTube, if you look up Larry Goes Splat, I killed Larry the Cucumber in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Oh my God.
It was a dark, cold, rainy night in Indianapolis, Indiana, in 2010. But I'm on this tour, and I don't think this is like bad, like to talk, but like at that point, Big Idea, like in Phil Vischer had gone bankrupt. So they'd sold it. So I show up like this homeschool, like sheltered kid, like I'm going to go change the world. Right. God made you special. And I'm the only Christian on the tour. Like everybody. VeggieTales had gotten bought by this media conglomerate that owned all these kids shows. So like Frosty the Snowman, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I end up on this tour with a bunch of people who are like, one of them just got off of Broadway, like The Lion King. These other people, like it's a gig. Like it's just a tour.
Yeah.
And so we'd be on the bus, like going after the shows at night, going to the next city. And I'd be on the back and they'd be asking me a question. Like, why do you believe what you believe? Like, why do you? And I knew what I believed, and I knew, I knew deep down it was so a part of who I was, but I couldn't articulate it. I did not know how to explain it. So while I was on the VeggieTales tour, I signed up to go to Christ for the Nations Institute. Like I just applied in the back of a bus in Dallas.
Hey, everybody. I advertise a lot of things on the Rita Springer podcast here, and I believe in everything that I am offering you. This particular one is something that I am really, really excited about. Jase, the Jase company, Jase Medical, contacted me, and when I read up on what they were doing and then ordered the Jase case and realized what it was, I couldn't tell you how excited I was, especially going through the pandemic and being in a place where you're like, gosh, how do I get an antibiotic, or how do I get this, or how do I get this? This is a medical kit that you pre-order and you have, much like you would have a first aid kit under your bathroom sink or something in the trunk of your car. Jase Medical has done this. It's the Jase case. It's called the Jase case. This is my personalized Jase case, going online and choosing the different antibiotics and things that I would need for if I travel. I'm going overseas, so I'll stick this in my suitcase. When it's not in my suitcase, it's up in my kitchen cabinet. And it just provides a peace of mind for me that if anything were to happen and I couldn't find a doctor or I needed antibiotics right away, sometimes, we've got shortages of certain medications nowadays. I mean, we're seeing all over the place. Tornadoes, hurricanes, fires. What's happening in LA is horrendous. And having something like this on hand, I think, is actually key and should be a resolution for our new year for everybody. So if you go to Jase.com and you type in the promo code Rita, RITA, and then 10, you're going to get 10% off your first Jase case. You basically get online, fill out the information. You're working with doctors online. So these are pharmaceutical drugs that are prescribed by real doctors. So everything that you're getting is valid and real and medically licensed. And basically you're just doing an interview online, and then you build your case the way you need to build your own case based on your family. They've got Jase cases and they've got kid cases. So you can actually build a case for your children as well, just to have the peace of mind in your cupboard. I love this. This literally has given me like, oh my gosh, if anything happens and I need some antibiotics, they're right here. And I've just detailed this for my own needs, and you could do that as well. You can add on, there's EpiPens, ivermectin, things like that you may want to add into your own personalized Jase case. So if you go to jase.com today, you're going to get 10% off with the promo code Rita, capital R, capital I, capital T, capital A, and the number 10. And so I want you to do this. I'm doing it. You should do it. It should be all of our New Year's resolution to give us a little bit of peace of mind for 2025.
So we got off tour, and then in spring, like January of 2011, started attending Christ for the Nations. And while I was at Christ for the Nations, I was dating this girl from Houston. And she had ended up in Dallas as well to go to a dance program that was there.
Okay.
So she was from my church back in Houston. Her dad was on staff at the church. He was one of the pastors, executive pastors there.
Which is great. Grace.
Grace Church. Yeah. And so I show up one night, like this is like in February. I show up one night, we're like going on a date to the mall.
Yeah.
And like I show up and she's like bawling, crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, what's going on? And she's like, my dad says I have to break up with you. And I'm like, oh, why? And she's like, I'm not allowed to tell you. Like, but it's so bad. Like if you knew, Tyler, it's so bad. And I'm like, well, just tell me. Like, why can't you? And she's like, I can't, but so.
And at this point, are you thinking, I've done something wrong?
I don't know.
Or are you like, did something happen to your family? Like, what's going on that you can't?
Yes. And or like, did I do something, say something? Because I'm genuinely a pretty likable human.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, it's like, I'm aware of like, if I did something to offend someone, I know to be like, that was, I messed up. But at this point, I'm like, what? Yeah. This doesn't make sense. So I go back to my dorm at Christ for the Nations Institute, and I call my friend, who was the one that we had that was running the kids performing arts stuff down in Houston.
You'd started this thing with.
He's one of my best friends.
And like, is he older than you?
Yeah, 8 years older.
Okay.
So he's kind of like in this weird older brother range. He's like 8 years older.
And was he on staff at that church?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was one of the worship pastors on staff that also ran a bunch of the kids stuff. And so I call him. I'm like, man, like my girlfriend just broke up with me. He knew who she was. And I don't know what's going on. Her dad said that she has to, and like she can't tell me why. And he just freezes like on the phone. And he's like, what do you mean her dad told you? Like, and I said, she just said her dad says you have to break up with Tyler, and if it's so bad, and I don't know what to make of it. And he gets like really weird on the phone and says, hey, don't go to bed. I'm going to call you back. And I'm like, okay. So, I mean, it's like 10 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
So I wait, and it's like 11 o'clock, 11:15, finally 11:30, he calls me back. And he was like, hey, there's something I need to tell you. And you have to remember, I've known him at this point like 7-8 years.
Yeah. From the time that you're this young teenage kid. Yes. And now you're in college at CFNI.
Yeah. And he says, I need you to know, like last summer, so we're having this conversation February 2010. February 2011. He says, last summer, while we were on that trip in San Diego, for that performing arts camp, we were in that hotel room, and while you were asleep, I came into your room and I touched you sexually. And at first I was like,
"Jeez, Tyler,
you're such," my response to him was literally like, "Okay, stop. Like, it's not funny. Like, my girlfriend just broke up with me. I'm heartbroken. I'm like, why are you joking about this? Like and he's like, no, I seriously, no, I did. I touched you. And so then I told Steve, I told Garrett, who were the senior pastors.
The senior pastors of Grace Church.
Afterwards, and we all decided that we weren't going to tell you or your family. They just didn't want y'all's faith in the church to be like shaken with like, we've seen some other church leaders fall. So
this
like,
is how he's coding it.
yeah. And what he says is like, I feel terrible. Like I feel like you're never going to be able to forgive me. Like I feel so bad. Like I feel awful about it, blah, 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 blah. And like 18-year-old Tyler, who was homeschooled, grew up in a conservative family, oldest of 6. Like in my brain, I'm like, I think he's telling me that doesn't feel like he's ever going to be forgiven. So I'm like, I forgive you, I guess. Like I forgive you. And at this point, he's like crying on the phone. He's like, I was ready to go to jail. I want to, like, I just don't know how I'm going to live with myself. Like, so like they decided when I told them to start sending me to counseling. So they've been sending me to a counselor up in Dallas. I go up, once a week and I see her, and we've been working through this. And so the conversation just ends kind of weird. Like, I don't know how to respond to like,
Of course,
I touched you while you were asleep.
Right. And you're just sitting there like trying to process what he's saying.
Yes. And
then feeling bad because he's so sad about it.
That he's so sad about it. It's my best friend, who I thought was my best friend. But then there's the layer of, but why is my girlfriend's dad, who's an executive at this church, making her break? Like, what did I do?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, what did I do? And so,
and you don't, when he's telling you this, you don't have a recollection of any of this because you're asleep in a hotel room.
No. Yeah. No.
Jeez.
So the next morning, like 7:30 a.m., Garrett, the pastor at this church, calls me. Says, "Hey, I heard you had a conversation with Joel last night." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he literally says, "What did he tell you?" And I said, "Well, he told me last summer we were on a trip, and while I was asleep, he came in and he touched me. And it came up because my girlfriend, she broke up with me because her dad, who works for you, is making her break up with me. He told her," which when you break down, like, finding out from like your girlfriend, being broken up with your girlfriend, and then finding out from your abuser is a wild way to be told.
It's insanity.
But in this world, I'm just still trying to piece together. And so he says this thing. He says, "Tyler, I was so angry when he told us. I wanted to hurt him. But what we decided was we didn't want it to ruin his life. He's a young guy. So we're sending him to counseling. And Tyler, like, I just want you to know, like, this doesn't affect you. It's not your story. So, we think that he should be the one that tells your parents. Like, we want him to go through a couple more like steps in his counseling, and when he's ready, he can tell your parents." And again, I'm trying to give context for, I've grown up going to this church. I was an intern at it for so long. So
you were embedded in the very fabric of this church.
Exactly.
So anything they said,
it's the only church I've ever gone.
Leaders.
Yes. And you also have to understand, growing up 90s and early 2000s homeschool culture for sure is also like your spiritual authority. Like you don't question that. You don't, and I don't blame it. That was the norm. It was like, why would I question that these people don't have my best interest at heart?
Well, and I also want to point out that I don't know your parents, but your parents are actually really good people.
Yeah.
So your parents trusted this church.
Absolutely.
And this church had at that point given them until that no reason not to that to be their safe house.
Correct. So he says, when Joel's ready and when y'all tell your parents, like, we'll walk you guys through that.
And can I just, in what world does the abuser get all of the allowances to tell the parents? That's just crazy to me. Did that ever cross?
Not at that time. No, because I thought this is normal. Like, these guys, they love me. This is the best like road forward. This is like, they've got this all under control. You look back on it now and it's just like, I think, what makes me sad about a lot of it is, like, for most of my life, and my family will tell you, and probably up until around this time, I always had this just like immense favor with God. Like, and like I would joke about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I would just say like,
Kind of like the Midas touch guy.
yeah. And like, and it felt kind of like David was a man after God's own heart. And I kind of felt that too. Like, I'm just like, God, I used to literally tell my family, does God love me more than some people?
Oh.
Yes. Am I going to apologize for it? No, I'm not. Like, I would say that all the time, like jokingly.
Yeah. But it is true. You have a lot of favor.
I just have immense amounts of favor.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until probably this was 2011. It wasn't until about 2017, 2018. And like a lot happened between them. But at one time during quiet time with God, he just like how he lovingly does, you know, when you just, I'm sitting on a couch, it's early in the morning, I'm drinking coffee and just having time. And he just asks like a simple question. And he says, remember what you used to say? Like, you were my favorite?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. And he said, why don't you say that anymore? And it was like the first time I'd even thought like, oh, I don't say that anymore.
Yeah.
And he was like, why don't you believe that anymore? And I think I hadn't even realized how deeply embedded like this was affecting me.
Yeah.
Because, and he so gently and sweetly was like, why don't you say that about you anymore? Like, cause you're my favorite. Yeah. Like, why don't you believe that anymore? And so that this is 2011 and, I trust the pastor. So we walk through, like, the abuser keeps going to counseling. He's doing his own thing. When I meet Connie, my wife, who back then, like, Connie was like wild. Like her hair was always big. She would do like dreadlock extensions. Like she just like, you know, she was like creative and like a dancer and like, so she moves up to Dallas. She had been in the Netherlands and South Africa for the past year and a half. And she moves to Dallas to come be a part of this dance program that my girlfriend had been a part of. That broke up with my ex-girlfriend. Yeah. And she ends up being roommates with my ex-girlfriend's old roommate from this. Like, and so Allie. And so when Connie and I meet, we're hanging out in these group settings. Like Allie introduced, like they were dancing at a Pink Impact, which is the women's conference at Gateway. And the director of the dance program that was choreographed and everything called and just said, hey, like we have a section where we need more guys. We only have 2 guys. Would you come be in this section? I'm not a part of their dance company, but I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Yeah, yeah. Well, do you want me to grab the cucumber suit? Like I'm in. So I showed up to rehearsal and I get introduced to Connie and I'm like, wow, she's cool. Like, you know, I like this chick. This is March of 2012. And we start hanging out in the summer of 2012. And then I asked her to be my girlfriend like in August. And so when we start dating, she's like, hey, I need to tell you something. Like I have a confession. Like I know everything about your story. Whoa. Because Allie, who's like was my good friend too, who was roommates with my ex-girlfriend. She didn't ever tell me your name, but she had told me like there was this situation and like she was trying to be. Allie was stuck in the middle between my ex-girlfriend and me, and like she's like it was weird. And so Connie was like, you've told me things about like, and we've processed things, and like I have to be honest, like I know all this, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's great.
At that point, were you just trying to bury it?
Yes, yeah. So so the classic Connie, she says, why haven't you said anything? And it was literally like a script in my brain, and I said, well, it's not my story. Oh God, it's not my story. Yeah. And Connie, like she would still do this to this day. Like she has this fierce look. She's like, what do you mean it's not your story? And I was like, well, it's like I'm like, I don't want to be like this victim. It's not my story. It doesn't affect me. Yeah. And Connie's like, yes, it does. Like, why haven't you told, like, and I mean, we've been dating for like a week at this point. She goes, why haven't you told your parents? I'm like, well, like they said like when he's ready to tell my parents.
Yeah. So your parents don't even know at this point.
No. At this point. So it's,
because the abuser hasn't decided. To tell them.
And so Connie is like, you have to tell them. So we start dating, and it turns out that my ex-girlfriend's brother also wanted to date Connie at the same time. So she takes him to coffee. He takes her to coffee and is like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I don't think you should date Tyler because I think, like, from some stuff my dad knows, like, I'm pretty sure Tyler is a homosexual.
What?
Like, I think he's like if you know that story, like, I think there was actually a relationship happening there. And I still laugh though, because Connie, like, it's just like, again, my wife, if one injustice to her is like, she really does see it, I think, through the lens of God, to where it's just like, no, that's not. But it's not even just like the injustice of this. It was that somebody started to spread lies about it.
Oh,
yeah.
There's so much manipulation.
Yeah.
Tyler, it's almost hard it's hard to process it, because that's just massive control and manipulation.
It's insane. And so she shuts him down very hard. Connie and I start dating. In 2013, we get engaged. Yeah. And then in December of 2013, I'm leading worship at like a pre-service for volunteers at weekend on the Gateway for the kids ministry. Like, we always do like a pre-service. Yep. So, there's 50, 60 people in there. I'm leading worship. And I see people come in the back, and they stand there, and then they leave. And I get a text, like that was a Saturday. I get a text like Monday or Tuesday from one of the pastors on staff at Gateway. It says, hey, Ty, can you meet me tomorrow in my office? And I'm like, absolutely. Show up. We're drinking coffee. And what he says is, he starts it by saying, listen, we all have things in our past that can either hold us back or can, propel us forward. And so I'm just going to ask you this question. I just need you to be honest with me. But what was the nature of your relationship with this guy down in Houston at Grace Church? It's the guy who abused me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, to be quite honest, like, he abused me in 2010 while I was on a trip in San Diego. This has happened, And he just gets this wide eyes. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. So we were giving a tour to some pastors this week, and we walked in, and they're from Houston. They weren't from Grace, but they were affiliated. But and he said, is that Tyler Bates on stage? And I said, yeah, he's one of our like main worship guys. He does a lot of the kids stuff. And the guy said, I just be careful. I heard some rumors that he was in a relationship with a man down in Houston. So I'm like, what? No, actually, it's the opposite. It was actually so not consenting that I was asleep. And this pastor
but you're still in the trying to protect this church that you're loyal to.
Yeah.
Because they've told you the script that you need to say.
And it's not my story. It's not my story. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't. And so that's verbatim. I just the reason I don't talk about this, I look him in the eye. It's not my story. Like, I just don't tell it. It's not my story. I'm not affected by it. It's like, I've moved on with my life, blah, 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 blah. And, he's like, great. So, that's another thing. Connie's like, what are they doing? So that's in the December of 2013. Well, in February of 2014. We're getting married in March of 2014. February, she comes from a family history of a lot of breast cancer. So a grandmom who died very early of breast cancer, an aunt who died like all 40. It's like so young. Cousins who have had breast cancer. And so she went in for a checkup, and they found lumps in her chest. Yeah. And so they take samples, and they were benign, but it's a precursor. Right. And they said, well, you just go ahead and take this test too. We want to see if you're like BRCA positive as well. And she's like, I'm not. My family, we have a different like gene strand, whatnot. She tests positive for that. So her chances go up from 65% of getting breast cancer before 40 to like 87%. Something like, it gets wild. And they're like, you have two options. You can do a prophylactic double mastectomy.
22 years old.
At 22 years old, or you can just keep monitoring this. We'll monitor every 6 months, but we're pulling golf ball sized lumps out of your chest at 22 already, and like the radiation from this isn't gonna help as we're trying to monitor it.
Right.
And so it was a big deal because, you know, she didn't want to walk down the aisle. Like her wedding dress was backless, you know, and she's like, I don't want scars on my back while I'm walking down the aisle. So we made the decision, let's wait till after the wedding and then we're going to do a double mastectomy. And so we got married March 23rd, 2014. And then 45 days later, Connie had her double mastectomy scheduled. She was going in, but the week leading up to it, my grandfather's birthday, he's passed now, but his birthday was always May 25th. So that's why I remember the date so well.
Yeah.
Is we were driving down to Houston to go celebrate him. It was like his 70th birthday, 70 or 75th. It was one of those. And we're driving down. We're married. We're 2 months married.
Newly married. Dealing with
like, hey, we're going into the week where you're about to have a double mastectomy. Yeah. And I'm driving like down. It was after church on a weekend. So it's a Sunday afternoon. And I'm driving and I'm talking to my mom on the phone and she's just like, church was so good this weekend. Like, so Steve.
Because they're still going to that church.
They're still going to this church, which is killing my wife on the inside. Oh. She's like, they need to know, like, how can you? And my mom is just going like, Steve was talking about like being a light in the darkness and living in righteousness and standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular, and doing the right thing. And like my stomach starts to like turn a bit. And I'm like, okay. So I hang up and Connie's like, just like drilling, like or stare into the side of my face. She's like, you have to tell your parents. And I'm like, I don't want to tell them. No, like that's not my story.
Yeah.
And she's like, we have to tell your parents because your siblings, your tiny siblings
are still going
to this church. They're around this guy.
He's still on staff. He's still on staff.
He's still on staff, and they have him dressing up as Santa in the kids ministry, letting kids sit on his lap. Like that's how wild it is. He's confessed. So Connie and I get in this fight. And it's really funny when I think back on it, like there was like a storm that was coming behind us in like Dallas and it's like, I could feel it. I'm like, oh, it's like brewing. Like, and you just know it's coming. And she's like, we're going to tell your parents. And I'm like, fine. So we do the celebration that night for my grandfather. And the next day it's also like, we have to get back up because I have a shoot for Wacky Week because we have the big like kids event coming up and we do 1,000 videos for it.
Yeah.
But we also, Connie, like we have to get ready for Connie's surgery. So we're there for the day and we're playing sand volleyball because it's Memorial Day. And I while we're there, I tell my parents like, hey, can we grab coffee before Connie and I head out of town? We just want to tell you guys something. Yeah. And I know my parents think like we're about to tell them we're pregnant. So we sit down at this Starbucks. That's 10 minutes from my house that I grew up in. And I look my parents in the eyes and I'm like, hey, so a couple years ago, I showed up for a date with my girlfriend and she told me that she needed to break up with me because her dad, and they know who she is, told her she needed to break up because it was so bad. And so I tell them the story, like it doesn't make sense. And I call this guy and he confesses this to me and my parents are just like in like shock. And they're like, when did this happen? Like, when did the actual event happen?
Yeah, now they're trying to work out timelines.
Yeah, and I'm like, it was 2010. He told me it was 2010. And they're like, so why haven't you told us? And I'm like, well, it's not my story. It's like, it's not. And my mom's like, yes, it is.
Yeah,
it is. And my dad's livid.
Oh.
He's like, how dare you take this from me as a parent, you know? And I said, well, and like the sucky thing is there's like people talking and I tell them about, you know, like there's rumors going around. Like it feels like someone here is trying to start rumors because in 2012, all the Jerry Sandusky stuff came out. Where it wasn't just Jerry Sandusky that got tried and sent to prison. Yeah. It was also the leads at the college who knew about it and did nothing with it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the person who committed the crime. It was the people who knew of the crime. Yep. And didn't act on it.
Yeah.
And so I said, I think that they started getting nervous. Someone did. and started trying to make it sound like I was in this
To
consenting
control and
relationship.
manipulate the situation. Yeah.
So we have this conversation, and it's like, I know I just blew up my parents' world, which is like, I think and it's probably for a lot of victims. A lot of victims don't come forward for years.
They do not, Tyler.
One, because they don't want to believe or accept that, like, hey, this happened, and I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
Some don't tell their parents because, like, there's even a weight of, like, I have to be the one to blow up my family's life here.
Right.
Like
You're gonna burst the little.
It's backwards. Yeah. It's like, but like, it's like, I see you living in this bubble and you're happy in it. And like, I have to be the one to pop it now.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It's almost unfair to the victim to be like, hey, like, this happened to you, and now you need to go make, like, your family's life, like, turn upside down and put them through hell.
Yeah. I mean, the shame alone of the abuse is one thing.
Correct.
But the way that manifests itself.
Yeah.
In the manipulation and the control. And in this situation, it's appalling that it's so controlled. The narrative is so controlled that you're still being victimized over and over and over.
Correct.
In them trying to control this narrative. I want to tell you a little bit about one of our sponsors today, which is HelloFresh. I love HelloFresh because it cuts my hassle of trying to figure out what to cook for dinner down, especially with my busy life. If you go to the HelloFresh website, you're going to get the availability of choosing your meal plans from up to 50 different wholesome, hassle-free meals. And you have different plans to choose from. There's like the new ready-made plan, which is kind of like from the fridge to the fork in less than 3 minutes, and the prep and bake. Here's what you're going to get when you go to this with the discount I'm offering you today. You're going to get up to 10 free meals, and you're going to choose a free protein, a high protein in each of those meals. So you're going to get one item per box for life, but you're going to go to hellofresh.com/lowercase Rita 10FM. That's hellofresh.com/Rita 10FM. One item per box with an active subscription. Free meals applied on the discount on the first box with a new subscription only, and that varies by the box. So again, you're going to get 10 free meals if you go to hellofresh.com/Rita 10FM today.
So I tell my parents, I'm like, we've got to drive back to Dallas now. I love you guys.
Oh.
I'm sorry that I haven't told you till now. Call me. Like,
I mean, how were they even remaining seated? I would, the chairs would be turned over in the restaurant.
Yeah. They weren't okay. And I remember like pulling away and looking at them in the rearview mirror and being like, I just crushed my parents. Ugh. Which is like, and I know they would never want me to wear that, but like,
that's
nobody wants to do that to anyone that they dearly love. And so my dad, he immediately calls Steve.
Yeah.
He sends a text first. What is happening? I want answers now. I will be at your office in the morning.
Yeah.
I want answers. And after 2 minutes, he's like, no, I'm calling. So he calls, and the first words out of Steve's mouth are, Clint, legally, we've done nothing wrong. Legally, you have no grounds here. We've done everything by the book. And my dad says, I'm just trying to get answers. Like, it's something happened 4 years ago to my son, and you guys haven't told me. And you told him,
yeah.
And this is
you
where
told him to wait for the abuser to get all right and ready, and then he'll confess to it.
And this is where it gets crafty, is because they'll say, we didn't tell him not to tell. And it's like, yeah, you're right. It's like a chess game. It's like, we never said they shouldn't tell you. But what you did tell me is it wasn't my story.
Right.
That it doesn't affect me, and that the abuser should be the one to tell my parents. And you have to remember, I'm 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to and this is what I hate. I still to this day will push the I'm not a victim. Mm-hmm. But I've had to learn to be like, no, I'm not going to rewrite history either. These are just the facts of what happened.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler, it's hard for me not to think of, my kid's 19.
Yeah.
The magnitude of something like this on his shoulders alone. 18's not mature enough to even
No.
process half this stuff.
Right.
And they know that. They're adults.
Yeah. So we meet. So my parents, they asked the abuser, because they set a meeting with the pastors there at Grace for the following evening.
Your parents do.
My parents do.
Yeah.
And before they go, they call the abuser and say, "We need you to come over right now." So he comes over with his. At this point, he's married, but he comes over. My parents have some friends who've been at the
Still
church.
on staff?
Still on staff. Still working with kids.
just-
And they said, we know. Tyler told us. But we have a meeting tonight with the pastors at Grace. And before we meet with them, we want to know everything. What happened?
Yeah.
And I get a call from my mom later, like that afternoon. And she says, Tyler, did you know that it happened twice?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, well, we had him come over and we said, we want to know. So he sat on our couch. He looked us in the eyes. He said, well, the first time it happened, Tyler was asleep. We were in one of those hotel rooms, or there's two rooms and then a living room in the middle. Tyler was on the pull-out couch in that room. And so while he was asleep, I went into his room and I pulled back his covers and I touched him. And he was specific at what body part he touched. I touched him here.
Yeah.
And when it was done, I felt so guilty. So I confessed to Brian, who was my girlfriend's dad.
Father.
And what he said is like, hey, let's not tell anybody. I'm going to mentor you. We're gonna get through this. So that happened in summer of 2009. He confesses. Someone on staff knows in the executive level. They let me go on the exact same trip in 2010, same sleeping arrangements. Lo and behold, the exact same thing happens again. This time, he goes immediately to the pastors and says, I did this. They find out it was twice. And that the first time it happened, I was a minor. Yeah. And this whole time, none of them had ever once implied or told me that it had happened twice. They only conveniently confessed to the time that I had just turned 18,
Or perhaps called the authorities because it's a crime to do what he's doing.
Correct.
Insanity.
And so they meet with the pastors there at Grace. It's iffy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not great. It's just like, they're just trying to get answers.
Yeah.
And so they call us afterwards that night and say, hey, would you guys, this is like a Tuesday night, would you guys be willing to fly in on Thursday evening, like afternoon, and meet with all of us? They want to meet with you guys. They'll buy your flights, fly in, fly out. So we do. Each pastor takes a turn coming in, just telling their side of why they did what they did.
So defending it?
Defending their reasoning for how they did it. My ex-girlfriend's dad is like, I don't know. Like, I'm on your side, Tyler. And at this point, my parents have heard me say, I just need people to stop talking about, like, they're making up stuff at this point.
Yeah.
Like, and it could affect
brought
my
on
job
by
up
those
here.
pastors. Yeah.
So my parents are going into this like, we need people to shut up, like, stop saying lies. And so what they do is they're like, we're going to have people sign NDAs. Tom Lane, he has this saying where he says there's a fine line between secrecy and privacy. Oh. And a lot of the times church will use privacy in a way to be secretive.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget the pastor. He sat across from me and my parents and Connie. And he said, listen,
Tyler, I'm so okay with you saying the name. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know you're not out to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And cause grief to anybody, but I mean, it's insanity.
Yeah.
To be a pastor and to allow what was allowed in your case.
Well, so look, Steve sits down.
Mother buried me.
Yeah, I know.
Pastor Steve Regal sits down.
And he looks my parents in the eyes and said, I don't know what to do with this. And he pulls out a letter of resignation from the guy who abused me. He said, he's a young guy, made some mistakes. I'd hate to see it ruin his life. What do you want me to do with this? Like, he puts it on us.
Oh,
like, I don't want to see it ruin his life, but what do you want to see me do with this? And it's like, I'm responsible for the well-being and the livelihood of this guy.
Yeah.
Like, you're the one who left him on staff working with kids for years. Now it's up to me whether or not you should fire him or let him go.
Insane.
So my parents were like, I don't know what you do with that. Like, we're not asking for now they would probably say fire everyone here. Yeah. But what they said is, we want to make sure this never happens again. We want to see reform. And do you have policies to make sure that this doesn't happen to other families? Do you have ways to make sure that kids are actually safe? Because you knew that this guy confessed to abusing, molesting a minor, and you've had him playing Santa in your kids' ministry?
Right.
Letting kids sit on his lap?
Yeah.
In what world?
What
judgment do you think that, hey, this is normal? And so my parents, they tried to stay there for a year to try and there's a guy in Fort Worth. His name is Greg Love. He runs this organization called Ministry Safe. And, they do trainings and certifications to help kids ministries or companies. It's all about making sure that you keep kids safe. So they tried to get a lot of things implemented, and it was a train wreck. That's a whole different rabbit trail. But my parents eventually leave that church, and we walked out of that meeting. So I walk out of that meeting, say goodbye to everyone. Connie and I get on a plane that Thursday, and then we get home at 10 p.m. at night. Connie has to get in the shower, and she has to use this special soap because we wake up at 4 a.m., drive to the hospital, surgery, and she goes in for a double mastectomy. And
Tyler.
And so everything blows up at once.
Yeah.
We're 2 months married. There's trial by fire for sure. There's getting thrown into the deep end. I don't recommend it for people, but I will say it can be the worst thing for your marriage or the absolute best thing for your marriage. And for us, it happened to be the latter. Because Jesus was so real. Yeah. But it was hard because we kind of switched focus for a bit on Connie. But I remember talking to my mom when I flew in at one point, and her and my dad picked me up from the airport, and they were like, "Hey, your siblings." I'm the oldest of 5 siblings.
Yeah.
And I have a twin, and then there's one that's he's an Irish twin. It's 18 months younger than us.
Yeah.
5-year difference, 5-year gap, and then 3 others, so another boy and 2 girls. And they're like, "Hey, your siblings have they're not idiots. They've picked up on there's a lot happening. Me and your dad are on the phone calls, we're emotional wrecks, So we sat them down last night, and we just made them aware of the situation and what happened, and I froze in the back seat. And
because now you wear the weight of your siblings.
100%. And it's their world too. It's their bubble. Right. And so here, and it's not that I feel bad about and I do, but it's not that I just feel bad about ripping away their comfort zone in that, but it's also for, up until this point, it's 4 years, 5 years from the initial one, but 4 years that I've known about it, that it's I've carried this alone. Uh-huh. And the more people you're letting into it, the more you're what does so-and-so think about it?
Right.
Especially as a guy who is sexually abused.
Yes.
You really don't want to talk about it.
The ramifications. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know? You just it's
and the church does a really very, sadly, a poor job at, just you've dined it out too. You're the victim, but then you're also thought the worst of in all these made up little illustrations because of the way the church handles.
Correct.
And
statistically, that happens a lot. Victims actually, and not just in the church, but really in the church, victims more times than not aren't just victimized in their abuse, but they're re-victimized when they try to bring it to the surface.
Right.
And so my mom's we told your siblings, and I'm asking her, I start with the youngest, What did
So
Peyton
and so
think about
say,
it?
yeah.
How did Kinsey respond to it? How
Yeah.
did Mason respond to it? How did Spencer respond to it? And then it was like my twin. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what did Dylan do?
Yeah.
Because like that was the hard one.
Yeah.
That's like, he's my best friend. He's
Right.
built-in best friend,
Right.
twin. And I had never told him. Like,
Yeah.
and she was like, well, we didn't just tell them about what happened to you in the 2 events, but we told them about the way they've kind of just been like lying about your character and attacking you. And even like how you, like your girlfriend broke up with you because of this, like, cause it had never made sense to them. Like,
which all that's coming from staff.
it is, it 100% is. And I said, so what did Dylan do? And she was like, he was so angry. And I remember sitting in the backseat of the car, like looking out as like tears are coming to my eyes, and still to this day, because it's like one of the greatest moments I've ever experienced with Jesus. Well, she was like, he was so angry, Tyler. Like he had his jaw was just clenched the whole time.
Yeah.
She was like, and he grabbed his fists, and like she said, it was like hot tears just coming down his cheeks. Like he didn't say anything. She said it was just like silent tears the whole time. He was doing this. And she said, finally, like after all your siblings walked away, I said, hey, are you okay? And he said, I just can't believe they do that to Tyler.
Yeah.
Like, why would they do that to Tyler?
Yeah.
Like, who could do that to him? Like,
yeah.
That's not fair. And it was, I think, like, it's the first time I had ever experienced Jesus in a deeper, darker place.
Yeah.
Because I was there and pretending like I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time it was like, oh, that's what Jesus thinks about it.
Yeah.
Like, he's not annoyed that I'm like in this dark place or in this secret place or in this like torment. He's actually, he knows it well, and he's sitting here too. And he's like, hey, I'm upset by it too.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
But up
makes
to
me
that
upset.
point too, Tyler, it's almost as if you didn't have a right to feel angry. It's like you didn't get to experience.
It wasn't my story.
Yeah, because you keep pushing it off because you've been told it's not your story. So you don't really know how to feel except shame and guilt.
Right.
And then you're made to feel guilty and shame for your family, for the staff, and then become the brunt of everybody's storylines.
Yeah.
Which is just it's just this the disgrace of the victimization that is over and over and over. It's re-victimize. And how do you then get to a place? I love you're just like John the Beloved. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you've had just a really beautiful connection with the Lord.
Yeah.
Which it's areas like this that people run screaming from the church. They never come back to the church. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit mind-boggling to me that your parents stayed for a year.
Yeah.
To a church that used that level of manipulation on a victim.
Yeah.
Just to try to make themselves look good.
They wanted to see, and they would tell you now, I don't know, unless it's really wanted, you can't, but they wanted to see the change. Before they left, they were like, we want to see these policies in place. We want to see this change happen. We want to make sure this never happens to another family. And, staying that long, you just get more and more frustrated because it's like you can't change something that doesn't want to change.
Well, no,
like, and it's like we always talk about, are you sorry that it happened or sorry that you got caught? It's like you never had any plans to tell me.
No,
it was always, well, when were you gonna tell us?
Right.
And it was like when Joel was ready. It's like, well, it's been 6 years. When is he going to be ready?
Right.
You know what I mean? Or five and a half.
The fact that they gave the power to the abuser. I mean, somebody stopped me from punching down a wall. Like, that alone is such gross manipulation that has nothing to do with the Lord.
No.
And nothing to do with church. And I think that's the most insensitive thing to me about these kind of stories is Jesus is the one that people leave. Mm-hmm. And Jesus isn't the one doing any of this.
Correct.
But it's under this, well, we want to just get him whole. We want to save his, and I understand.
I get it. Yes.
But to the degree that you are re-victimizing a victim to cover up your own gross manipulation and control, because if word got out, the whole edifice would come crashing down.
Correct.
And edifices are crashing down right and left because word's getting out.
How
did they get away with it?
Imagine, because we believe pastors are shepherds, and it's like what they did was they watched a wolf attack a lamb, and then what they did is they sent the wolf to counseling and told the lamb, "You're okay, you're fine." They watched the lamb like kind of hobble around, and said, "You're fine, you're fine, you're fine. It doesn't affect you." And you took care of the wolf. Like that's not a shepherd.
Yeah.
Like in what world?
In
what world do we actually like restore the wolf? And I believe Jesus can redeem, restore all people. I know that the gravity and the weight and in the light, my heart is as dark as anyone's.
Yeah.
I know that, but you don't sacrifice the all for the one. Like it's always the one for the all. So there's someone who admits to, I have this issue.
Yeah.
I do this. I hurt people. I have a proclivity to do. You remove them.
Right.
Like you
immediately.
You've lost. And so, but what they did with the abuser is they called a church in Austin, said, "Hey, we want him to go through a restoration process." Bigger church in Austin. Took him. He didn't go on staff, but had him volunteering in the student ministry around students. And
so they sent him to get help to another church to be part of a
restoration plan
while he's around young people.
So this is what's hard, and it's, I think what Connie and I have found over years is the church has a hard time separating sin from crime. And we think that they're the same thing.
Yeah.
And in a sense, they exist in the same bubble and sphere. But the reality is yes, Jesus paid for sin. Absolutely. And he forgives our crimes. I believe that too. But there's, just like the wages of sin is death and the gift of God is eternal life, there is a consequence for sin. There's a consequence for crime. There has to be. And when you try to circumvent one or the other, so it's like, it would be just as bad to be like, well, I'm going to prison, but I don't feel like I need to repent. Like I didn't do anything wrong, but I'll sit in jail. Like, I'll pay the price, but I'm going to do it again. Like we look at those people and we're like, how dare they? Like, don't let them around. Like they're not repentant. They haven't. But when it's the opposite, when it's like, well, God forgave me and I repented. And it's like, that's great. I'm still looking to see, are you going to walk out the full process? Yeah. Like it can't be either or, it's both and. Like it's
I think that's the sticky thing when the church is involved.
Yeah.
Because, God's the sin cover, right? God's the sin forgiver.
Absolutely.
But it's like, but these were crimes. These aren't just sins.
Correct.
They're crimes. And I do think it's important in the church to talk about that. Does everybody sin? Everyone sins. Everybody sins. I mean, none of us would want to walk into Times Square and then in a flash have our sins on all those TV screens.
No.
I think that the difference is true repentance of sin brings us into grace and mercy with the Lord.
Yeah.
And we don't walk with shame. So if your sins are flashed on all the TV screens in Times Square, there's still probably an element of shame, but you can honestly say, yeah, man, in my youth, I did some stupid, dumb stuff, but man, thanks to the blood of the Lamb. When you're crossing over the line to crimes, and then trying to cover crimes up with Christianity and Christian easy and leadership and ministry. And, people should just forget about it because it's under the blood or it's under the cross. But they were things that were never, ever really exposed or dealt with or legally brought to justice in.
Correct.
And I think it's why we have the Gateway Church stuff. We have the IHOP stuff. We have all this other stuff that's emerging because we're not just talking about sin. You and I were talking about just the fact that, man, if you're an alcoholic and you've gone through rehab, maybe don't own a bar.
Right.
Like, let's not like go back into, well, it's my ministry. Let's switch.
I don't think so.
Let's figure out what else the Lord's called you to do, because, you know, you don't want to be a sex addict and then be around the internet all day long. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Correct.
let's set the bar,
Right.
and let's learn from what it is our problems are. And if there's true redemption, it's not the license to go back into spaces that actually can breed that sin again in
Yep.
your life. But this thing that the church is, it's inconceivable to me.
Yeah.
When minors, and there's victim after victim after victim, and there is just, you have to call a spade and say, nope, there's no excuse for that. Nope, there's no excuse for that. Nope, that's manipulation.
Correct.
That's absolute, that's crime on their part. To
Yes.
hide and to try to heal the wolf.
It hurts.
And because you got your moxie back.
Yeah.
You had to stand up.
It took some time.
It took years.
Yeah, because Connie got her double mastectomy in May.
Yep.
And that's, they cleared out all the tissue. They put expanders in.
Yep.
We go in for the reconstruction August of 2015. So it's 3 months. And we check in, and right as the doctor's putting the IV into her arm, the nurse is doing it. The doctor comes running and says, "Hey, don't do that. Hey, I'm so sorry. We can't do the surgery today. We can't operate on women that are pregnant."
Yeah.
And
'Cause you
Connie
didn't
and
know
I
you
are
were
sitting there.
pregnant.
Yeah, we're like, well, okay, is there someone, like, was there someone in the operating room that was pregnant? Like, is there a big ordeal? And he's like, "I'm so sorry you're finding out this way. The blood work we took when you came in, like,
You're pregnant.
And that was a whole ordeal.
Yeah.
Because Connie's like, I have to, like, I've had these
Oh, yeah.
expanders in
Oh,
my
yeah.
chest for
Yeah.
3 months, now another 9. And
Yeah.
so we found out we got pregnant in the midst of her mastectomy journey. So we have our first child in May of 2015, and we name her Bravery.
Yeah.
And everyone's always, and it is, but they've always assumed that we just named her Bravery because of Connie's journey, which is true. Like it was, but we were both walking through our own journeys of like, we're having to step into bravery in our own rights.
Oh gosh,
like,
Tyler.
And I was learning how to tell myself the truth. Like, I think, which is harder in and of itself. Like, nobody tells you how hard it is to actually sit and tell yourself. You can make up lie after lie or deceive yourself. Like, it's no big deal. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. And the moment you start to actually, like, Rita, I would have night terrors. Like, Connie would be like, "Why do you wake up like heaving?" And I'm like, "Well, like, I have these dreams like a couple times a month." It progressed to be more and more, but a couple times a month where it's just like I'm asleep, but I know I'm asleep, but I feel paralyzed and I can't move, and there's someone in my room, and I can't move. I can't move.
Of course, yeah.
And she was like, "That's trauma." And so I was putting Bravery to bed one night, and I put her down, and I stood there for a bit, and I just stared at her, and I walked out of her room, and Connie was in the kitchen, and I said, "Hey, I think that, like, if anyone ever touched Bravery, I wouldn't care if she was asleep or awake. I would go after them for everything they are. Like, I would want Bravery to know that, like, I will knock down every wall that stands between her and that." Like, and Connie was like, "Yeah." And I said, I think I need to talk to someone about, like, I'm. So we met with Todd Lane at Gateway.
Yeah.
And, like, the people at Gateway had actually been fantastic. Like, Ken and Mary Jackson, who are the kids pastors, they were some of the first people I told. And Mary was one of the first people who was like, "Hey, Tyler," because I just said it so nonchalantly. This happened. It's not my story. And she was like, "Hey, no, hey, Tyler, no, like, hey, we need to work. Like, we got to talk through this. Like, I think Jesus wants to touch some parts here." And so we met with Todd Lane. And I said, "Hey, this is kind of the story, this is what happened. We may levy legal action against the church." And that's not always a popular thing in the church world, but then being on staff at a church and doing it. And he was, Todd's fantastic.
Yeah.
And he was like, "I can't imagine what you are working through and walking through. and the journey that you are on. And I think you need to do everything you need to do in order to seek wholeness and healing.
Yeah.
And I think we support you in whatever you're doing. So,
especially with regard to how it was handled.
yes.
If it was handled appropriately, maybe that would have been in question. But it was so grossly handled that, it would be really hard.
Yeah.
If you had never just been like, sorry, we're gonna find a lawyer.
Yeah. And Todd was even like, hey, like, I want you to do that, but can we pay for counseling? Like, can we, and they didn't pay for the cheap kind. It wasn't, and it's not digging on, like, I'm not saying there's tears, but I'm saying like, it was the really good kind.
Which is a beautiful attribute of Gateway. Beautiful.
They love healing and wholeness. And
absolutely.
And so, that was the first time I went. I got connected to my counselor, Debbie. She was fantastic. Started going for like 2 years. Through her, got in contact with some attorneys, and through a big ordeal, ended up filing a lawsuit against them. And have been. And like, our legal system is not great. Fun fact, it's not set up for victims.
Nope.
And it's just slow. Like, it really is. And I don't say that in like it should be fast, but I'm just saying it's not quick. But we found ways to walk out and work through healing for me. And that took a long time.
Yeah.
Like, and there's still like, I wish I could be like, oh, I'm great. Like, am I better than I was? Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a long way to go? Oh yeah. It's if someone ran you over today and like they ran over your legs.
Yeah.
And you were sitting in court and being like, hey, I need you to pay my doctor's bills, or I need you to, they're like, you're fine. Like, you're sitting there with 2 casts.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, the thing is, it's like, am I alive? Yes. Is there a cast around my legs? Yes. But I don't know if I'm ever going to walk the same again. And the healing process is going to take some time. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think sometimes people just expect, like, the trauma happened, they just got to get over it and move on. It's like, no, that healing, like, and if you don't go see a doctor right away, you know what I mean? If you don't go get that orthopedic surgery right away, if you don't, it can get worse and worse and worse. And there's more stuff you got to work through to get back to a normal place. And so what it did for me, and what we had to dive into for me, and I still have it, is like, believe it or not, I've got deep-seated trust issues. Like, that's like, hey, do you trust anybody? I don't know. Like, I trusted people for 18 years of my life, thought they had my best interest at heart, and then turns out they didn't. Yeah. I want to trust people.
Yeah. How do you? Because you're still all about the church. Yeah. You know, you're pouring curriculum into churches for kids, and you have one of the best curriculums out there for churches to grab a hold of in their children's departments. How I think I'd love to. I know that the lawsuit was long and horrible.
Yeah.
And I do want to just because I want you to speak to victims.
Okay.
But I do want to say that watching you for years, it's been years, walk through this lawsuit.
Yeah.
And being further just shocked by the behavior of Grace Church and their staff. And their further manipulation of the narrative, and trying so difficult to just wait it out so it all just kind of goes away. And luckily, there are things that are now in the news that for you was an asset for your case, I think, with all the other churches that are in the news.
Yep.
And the fact that we're in a season of the voice of the victim.
Yes.
And I think that is so incredibly important for for people of faith to know this is the season for the victim.
Yeah.
And this is a season for the voice of the victim to arise. I do not believe that it is any way a part of God's character that the victim would be silenced.
No.
And what you're breaking apart too, and some of the things that you said is the difficult journey that a victim has, not just in the initial attack or the initial victimization that brought on with the occurrence that brought on the whole journey of it, but just the way that victims are treated, the way that they're told that it's not their story. And then it's that they're responsible, because if they start telling their story, they're going to create cracks in the walls and everybody's going to know about it. And then it's not just shame to them, but it's shame to the family. It's shame to people that know. It's shame to the new narrative that's now out. And what are people going to think about them?
Right.
It's this absolutely horrible spider web of no wonder victims stay quiet. No wonder they don't say anything.
We don't make it a welcoming place to be the one who points out the dark spots in the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I love the kingdom. Oh my God, I love the church.
Which is what I think is so beautiful about you.
Oh, I love the church.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus does too.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people have a really, really, really bad image of how strong the church really is.
Yeah.
Like God has such a good track record.
Yeah.
Of holding it and building it himself. Like he's really good at it.
Yeah.
And we in our own disillusion think that this one person flipping the lights on in the corner with the cobwebs is going to destroy the whole thing.
Right.
And I get excited when somebody does it because I'm like, oh, you don't understand. Like it actually makes us stronger.
Yes.
Like that's the king I know.
Yeah.
Who stands up from the throne and is like, wait, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
Like, and it makes us better.
Yeah.
It's the kindness of God
Yeah.
to purify and refine it. And I think there's two sides to it. I think there's people who they really have a poor outlook on the church. They think that it's so fragile and frail that if you were to point out the flaw or if you don't just immediately move on, because I get it. I'm not here to rag on like they did this wrong, they did this wrong, this is their sin. I get it. None of us want that. What I will say is we can't rewrite history and we can't deny the facts of somebody. It's not just their experience. It's just the facts. It's like this happened, abuse, trauma, hurt, pain happened, and it doesn't offend and it doesn't make Jesus uneasy. Like 10 times out of 10, he moved towards those people.
Yeah.
He moved towards them. And I wish we as the church could learn how to be better at responding and coming around. You want to know something wild is before I told my parents about all this, for my job, I was touring Chicago, Willow Creek. And I ended up being there this random weekend where it had just come out that 2 kids had been molested in their kids ministry.
Wow.
And it was like they had a guest speaker that week. So I stepped into service because I just want to see this like sanctuary. And right before I think it was Dr. Caroline Leaf was about to come out, Bill had to get up on stage. And I'll never forget standing in the very back of this room in Chicago. And he gets up on stage and says, as many of you know, you probably saw that this week in the news, it came out that someone who volunteered in our kids ministry was sexually abusing, molesting kids in our kids ministry. There are 2 families that are affected by this. Now we can say with absolute certainty that this is the only 2 times in the past 20, 25 years this has happened. But 2 times in 25 years is 2 times too many. And Bill looked at his entire congregation and said, the families of these children have decided to levy legal action against our church, which is completely within their right to do so. So would you join us in just praying for these families as we try to surround them as they pick up the broken pieces and ask that the Spirit of God would be with them and around them as they do that, and how we as their church family can be supportive in that.
And you're sitting in
and
the
I'm
back.
sitting there being like, is this normal? Like, because it didn't feel
Right,
normal, you know,
because
like,
that wasn't
and it's
your
not
scenario.
exactly. And I just wish sometimes there was more of we weren't scared of, or we weren't offended by, or we weren't worried about if someone points out something that is a dark place in the kingdom, that it's a house of cards. Right. Like Jesus is the cornerstone that this is built on.
Right.
Like it's built on him. It's not built on this personality, this person, this
but we
celebrity.
make it so.
We do.
And I think that's the problem, isn't it that we put so much pressure on the man that's the one that's the pastor of it all.
Yeah.
And ends up being in the place of Christ.
And it's sad because then we also see churches, they'll want to acknowledge it, but then move on really fast. You're like, okay, we're healing. It's going to be better. It's going to be better than ever. God's not done with us. I'm like, that's true. I agree with that. That's not the truth you need to be proclaiming right now. Like none of us, I never thought that God was done with your church. It's not your church.
Right.
It's his.
Right.
Like I've seen him use crazier instances in this. But can we not, let's not treat this instance or this victim or this situation like a speed bump, but can we pause? Can we just pause for this? Isn't a speed bump. This is an actual wall, and we have to go left or right here.
Yeah. Can
we stop for a second and ask God where we're going from here?
Right.
And I love the church, and it's why, why Connie and I, we have a kids curriculum company, and we do curriculum now for a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And it's I was 8 years old and going to this church, but there was a man who worked in the kids ministry. He volunteered every Sunday. He didn't work. He just volunteered. And I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing a button-up shirt with khakis, and I had my little Noah's Ark Bible case with the rainbow handle. And I showed up to church one weekend, sat on the row, and this man, he got up on stage, and he's like, I need some help. And he picked this kid who always got picked. I was so upset. This kid always gets picked. But he took the kid and he tied a bandana around his leg. And he was like, all right, Ben, just walk. So Ben would start to walk, and his name was Mr. Jim. And Ben would walk, and Mr. Jim would walk with him. And then Ben would walk over to this part of the room, and Mr. Jim went with him. And Ben would walk around the chairs, and Mr. Jim walked with him. Then he untied it, had Ben sit down, and he was like, let me tell you about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he was like, and he tells us this story, and he said, here's the best part about this story. And even, did you see when I tied the bandana around Ben, did you know that that's Jesus? There's nowhere you're ever going to go that Jesus is not with you. There's nowhere you can go that he can't follow or has not been.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but at 8 years old, that clicked for me.
With you.
It clicked. And I call them clickable moments. And I didn't even realize it at that moment, but it was a seed that was so deeply planted in my heart that 10 years later, 11 years later, when the worst storm that I've ever found myself in my life came, the storm didn't knock me off my course or blow me away. It watered the seed that was planted deep in my heart at 8 years old. And the fruit that grew from it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I didn't reach for, a lot of people in my position, they reach for drugs, alcohol, porn, a lot of random things. Mm-hmm. And I just knew I can reach for Jesus.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it clicked for me that day, but God knew that there was a seed that had to be planted. And so I'm so passionate about that for kids.
Yeah.
Building a faith framework that they don't grow out of, but they grow into. And it's you may not even understand this yet. You may not even know how much you're going to need this one day. Yeah. But we're just going to use the word of God like seeds, and we're going to throw it out there. And trust it's falling on good soil. And one day when the storms of life come, because they do, we're promised that, it's not going to blow you off course. It's going to water the seeds that have been planted. And so that's what we do. We teach the Bible. We teach the Bible, and we teach kids to know the author of it.
Hey, everybody, I want to take a minute to talk to those of you and encourage those of you who maybe you're planting a church, you're on staff at a church, you're in the children's department of a church, and you run and oversee the curriculum at your kids' division of church. There is some friends of mine that have developed this curriculum that I just think it's the best curriculum for kids church out there. It's called Amazing Kids. It is a Bible-based, spirit-filled curriculum. I know these guys, they are incredible creatives. Connie and Tyler Bates are the genius behind this, and they just love serving kids and serving God in serving our kids. If this is something that your church is looking for, if it's something that you as a pastor of your children's department is looking for, an enriched Bible-based curriculum to bring to your children's department of your church or your church plant, this is something that I would highly recommend that you do. I fully believe and back what these guys do. My own kid was under it for years, and it's just the way that they're doing it right now is just beautiful. So you can find all that information if you go to amazing.kids, and there's a kind of a special discount code that you can get, or a promotional code that you can get if you type in Rita in the promotional area of that, and they'll give you special pricing on that. But it's something that I just highly recommend. And kids are so important. They're so important in our churches. What we do when we drop our kids off in church and what's happening in the Sunday school area is so important for your children. And this curriculum is one of the best, and you will love it for your church. So check that out. It's incredible, and I back it 100%. And is your hope, like, the little parts that we all play in this big thing called the church and in ministry? I mean, I think about what I do in worship is great. I love writing songs and all that kind of stuff. But I think the meat of my ministry is really just mentoring and encouraging and raising up a generation to do it the right way, and to passionately love God and to see God through and beyond all the stuff that the enemy's going to throw at us. Mm-hmm. I much like you, I think there was this thing in me that obviously the Lord knows our journeys, and he knows what we're going to fight, and he knows what's up ahead. But I think he does instill in us kind of a strength, or kind of, he plants in us these seeds that are like, they're going to need that. They're going to need that, because the greater story is that we all have a testimony. Yeah. We all have a story. It's interesting to me that part of the dynamic of your tragedy is that you didn't have the rights to your story, because the most powerful thing is your story. The most powerful thing is your testimony, whether it's in the dark times of it or whether it's in the brighter times of it. Yeah. Is there hope in your heart that we as the church would get to a place where there would be more safety? Because Tyler, you and I both know that right now, what's being really talked about is all of this kind of stuff that's happening in the church. It's being highlighted for whatever reason, whether God's got a big broom and sweeping out the corners or whatever people want to say. For whatever reason, what can be shaken is being shaken. So I'm going to say, God knows he's up to something, okay. But I also don't want to miss and only be talking about the dark corners of the church.
Right.
There are some beautiful churches. There are some incredible places called the church with really beautiful names that are places that are feeding the poor. And I mean, I was at a church this past weekend in Texas that I'd never been to before. And I remember the senior pastor came back and he introduced himself to me, and we were talking, and I was talking to his wife the day before about all the stuff that they're doing. And man, when he walked out, I was like, it actually makes me emotional thinking about it, but I was just like, whoa, that's a good man. You know what I'm saying? I was like, that's a man of God. And it took my breath away. Yeah. And I just was like, he's a really good man. Yeah. It caught me by surprise, because I thought it's been a while since I've been in a green room with a really good man of God. And then listening to how they're feeding the poor and taking care of the orphan. And I'm like, why aren't we talking about these churches?
Yeah.
Why aren't our Instagrams full of people that are feeding the poor and people that are saving the widow and people that are putting their arms around victims and pulling them? It's like there are
It's happening.
beautiful hundreds and thousands of more
happening.
stories of really amazing churches. And that's why I'm fighting for the church.
Yes.
Because there is the storylines of the tragedies of what you had to go through, but it doesn't mean that the church is a pit.
It's not. It's Connie and I, we were right down the street from here. We sat at a church service last year.
Yeah.
And we ended up being there for their anniversary service, and they were dedicating their land because they're building a place for the widows and the kids who age out of the foster system.
Yeah.
And we sat in the service weeping because it was just a holy spot where it's like, oh God, you're doing something beautiful here. And I know that that's happening everywhere. I know that's why I don't get scared when stories come out.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me worried because I know. I'm not saying it's an exception. I'm saying it's a piece of, and it's okay because we do have a God. God rebuilt the wall through Nehemiah with broken pieces.
Yeah.
Go back and read that story.
Yeah.
Like the neighbors come and they start laughing at, oh my gosh, if a doe jumps against your wall, it's going to be knocked over.
Yeah.
But it's like, Jesus is the true and better Nehemiah. He is. He builds his kingdom with broken pieces to build something grander and better and beautiful. Yeah. So I don't think that it's just like oh my goodness, like we're just watching the rise and fall of the church. It's like, no, the church is steady. Yeah. Like the Holy Spirit did light the flame, and it's not going out any day soon. So I've learned we just have to. What's that story in Matthew where Jesus, he asks the man who had the withered hand. I want to say it's Matthew 25. I could be completely off, but it's in Matthew. And it says that the man came up to him and Jesus says, show me your hand.
Show me your hand.
And it was his right hand. Yeah. Which back then that was your hand of strength. Yeah. In that community and in that culture, like your right hand was your strong hand. It was, there was shame attached to this. The man had to probably remove it from his cloak or from behind and hold it out in front of everyone for Jesus to touch and heal. And I've learned in my own life that Jesus can't heal what we're hiding.
Right.
And it's not
so good.
And it's not that he can't. I'm not saying theologically he can't. Jesus can do whatever he wants. Jesus won't heal what we're hiding. And we have to be willing to bring it into the light and say, here you go, Jesus. And I've learned in my life, anytime you reach for Jesus, you will not be disappointed. Right. And so this man reaches out for Jesus, and in his shame and in the things that he thought were so terrible, Jesus touches and heals him. So as a church, I'm not discouraged when we're saying, okay, hey, these things that we thought we needed to hide and these things that we were ashamed of, here you go, Jesus. Yeah. I think you can heal this. I know you can. Yeah. And help my unbelief if I don't think that this is something you have under control. And I wish we would just see it as that. There's a beautiful moment happening in our churches where it's not a moment where, sure, God's sweeping out the right.
It's painful.
It's painful.
But
it's also hey, Jesus, here you go. Yeah. These places that we didn't think existed or we didn't want anybody to know about in our churches. Okay, I'm going to put it in the light and I'm going to put it in front of Jesus. Yeah. He heals those things.
He heals those things.
He touches those things.
I mean, I do think of the reinforcement when things crumble. Yeah. And it really isn't the church that crumbles. It is a location built on something that wasn't. Yeah. It's like being built on sand.
It is.
It's like if you build a church and it looks really great from the outside, but inside you're so busy with the wizard behind the curtain trying to make things work so that you keep the edifice. It's like it's never going to give God the opportunity to do the most beautiful things in there. Right. So I do think what a grand opportunity for God to be like, I'm a peace sweeper upper. Yeah. So if you let me come in, I can actually change the walls of this church to be what it was always meant to be. But what your shame, what your own sin, what your own, idea and control thought it could be. And I do think we need to look at it more like that. And I say that for the church because I have hope for the church.
Same.
Like I just love the church, and I'm like, if the Bible says to love what he loves and hate what he hates, it's like we have to hate the things that he hates, which are all of hell and its neighbors. But what does he love? He still loves this thing that he's writing back for, and we look pretty traumatized and horrified right now. Yeah. But he's still coming back for it, and then in that, not to even allow that to sound to victims.
Yeah.
You've got to love the church. You've got to love the church. It's like, hey.
Yeah.
The way that some people feel about the church and the stories that I've heard, there's nothing in me that says, well, you're not validated with everything that you just said, why you've run from the church and why you don't want anything to do with the Lord. Validation, grant, But Jesus is still good and God is still kind.
Yeah.
And it's your right to shout as a victim.
Because you're a part of the church too.
Yeah. And I want victims, especially those that maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to Tyler's story and it does maybe bring up some triggers, I mean, stories like this can't not help but bring up triggers.
Yeah.
And I love, Tyler, that you're so honest with, you're in the process of your healing. You would not be, you've never said to me, I'm great now, everything's,
No.
And I think it is a process. I think you're many years down the road and you've had some victories. And I think the story in and of itself, I don't want to use the word victory because Jesus holds the victory for that. I'm actually sad at the way that your whole legal battle walked itself out. I think it's tragic.
Yeah.
And I hope that one day people will take responsibility for their actions in your case. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but one can hope and pray. But the fact that you're here and you're not where you started, you'll keep progressing and moving forward.
Keep moving.
And for those that are victims, get loud.
Please.
Get loud.
I used to make this joke, and it was a terrible joke, and God thought it was funny, but I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't write this book anymore. But at the beginning of my journey, I used to say, I'm going to write the book, Bridezilla and the God Who Loves Her, my story of abuse within the evangelical church. And
oh my gosh.
And now it's more of like a, and God didn't be like, hey, that's my, what he said is like, I love her though. I love her. And you're a part of her. Like I can't choose when I want to stand on the outside and be like, look at her, because I am her. Yeah. I am the bride,
Yeah.
And so I think it's both and. It's for people who are not victims, could we be a space?
Yeah.
For people to air like, this is where I'm at. And for people who are victims, can you trust that you are just as valid and just as much a part of the bride of Christ?
Yeah.
You need to speak up.
Yeah.
And trust that it's Jesus who restores and redeems his bride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How, I usually ask questions, a few questions, like rattle off some questions. How does forgiveness look now for you in this process?
I think I have a much better, and I'm not saying it's even perfect or great. I'm saying at first I thought forgiveness, when this all started, 18-year-old Tyler would have told you, just forgive because you're supposed to forgive. Move on. I do still think that I'm supposed to forgive. But we tell kids all the time, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting it to hurt the other person. So I've released it, and I genuinely, harbor no unforgiveness in my heart towards any of those people. It's
that's huge.
It's
That's
okay to forgive, but to also walk through a process where you're making sure that people are held accountable to things.
Yes, absolutely.
Forgiveness is not like a
Forgetting.
Yeah, and or just like a blank, like, all right, just throw a blanket over it, forget about it, and move on. Forgiveness is a heart thing.
Yeah.
And it's a continual thing for me in a situation like this.
Yeah.
It's hard to actually be one and done. I have to constantly. I mean, just last week, Jesus, what's there?
Yeah.
Say, oh, you see that right there? You know, like the little closet in my heart where I just
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
it and hope he doesn't see it. It's like, all right, like, take it out.
Yeah.
I don't want it. But it's forgiveness is active. It's not just, for me, it's a shower. I have to shower every day.
Yeah.
So, but I need it too.
Yeah.
So that's what forgiveness looks like now, is like, it's an active everyday. Where am I letting it creep back into my life? Or like, and it comes in different waves, like thought patterns, processes, like things I say.
Yeah.
And I have to really, really take captive every thought.
Hey, everybody, this is Rita Springer. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me on the podcast here with Worship is My Weapon. There's a lot of things I'm doing right now. And one of the things that we provide alongside this podcast is a newsletter that we do that we send out to those of you that are subscribed, where I just answer questions and kind of give you information. And sometimes you guys are able to write in with questions that you just are curious about. We love that. We love that interaction. I actually love to interact with those of you that want something a little bit more beyond the podcast. So if that's you, make sure to get our newsletter, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, and stay in touch with all the things that we're doing here on the podcast in that newsletter. Would you recommend to somebody that maybe might be watching the podcast and hasn't yet spoken about their abuse in the church? What would you say to them? Like, what would be your advice in their first steps?
You got to tell someone. And I say this, I know, as a guy who just like, I love illegal action against a church. Don't bring it forward to burn it down.
Oof.
Like,
Wow.
Please don't. Like, I'm not saying that in the aftermath or in the process of bringing stuff forward. Like you said, sometimes it's the man-made systems that burn themselves in processes like this.
Yeah.
But don't bring it forward. Like, I constantly have to make sure I'm not Jonah on the hill waiting for Nineveh to fall.
Yeah. Ooh, that's so good.
Constantly.
Yeah.
That's what it looks. So don't be the one who's like, this is what happened to me, throw it in their face,
Right.
and then hike up the hill and be like, all right, God, smite it. It's like, oh no, I don't think he is rich in loving kindness and quick to forgive. Like, and he gives people so much time to get it right. Like, and to my pain, I've watched God be so patient and kind with people involved in this story.
Yeah.
And it's only ever helped me to remember he's the same with me. But you have to bring it forward. And and you can't do it for something, or you can't do it because if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, the moment somebody says something that is triggering, which is 9 times out of 10 going to happen, you're going to shut down. Like, you're doing this because it's a part of your healing process. You can't begin to heal until you name it. Name it.
Yeah.
Jesus said it all the time to the demoniac. What's your name? The moment it's named, it loses its power. Like, you have to name it. You have to tell yourself the truth. You have to say it out loud, and you have to reveal it so that Jesus can touch it. Like, so I would highly encourage, like, do it well.
Yeah.
Do it well.
What would you say to the wounded warrior out there that would say, How do you ever trust God again because God allowed it?
I'm his freaking favorite. Like, it doesn't change, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it just, like,
Yeah.
I just know that now.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't, for a
Do you
time.
think that was a cushion for you? Because
Yeah.
you always knew that God loved you so much?
Yeah. Like, I can read John and, like, the disciple who Jesus loved.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not mad at God because,
Yeah.
like, I know I'm his favorite. And, like, I know he didn't cause it. I know he allowed it. But there is not one moment I have walked that I have felt alone in it.
Wow.
Like, not one moment.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm okay with them. Like, did it hurt? Yes.
Yeah.
Did it suck? Absolutely. Would I do it? Sign up for it again? Absolutely not.
No. Yeah.
But there is a God who will just not let go of me
Yeah.
because I'm his favorite.
Yeah. All right. Last question. How have you begun to rebuild trust with the church?
That one's harder,
Yeah.
like, as a victim, because I think you have natural cynicism, or, you know, you're way more,
Yeah.
like, everything is like, I am eternally like a hopeful romantic for the church.
Yeah.
And also
yeah.
internally like its biggest critic.
Yeah.
And there was a war at all times raging on the inside of me of like, it's never gonna work. It's
Right.
beautiful. It sucks.
Yeah.
Like, and but you said it. Like, I love what Jesus loves.
Yeah.
And he loves
Yeah.
it in all of its imperfections. He loves it. And I don't expect it to be perfect. You and I, we've seen enough church now. Every church is going to have its own thing. And I hate using that as an example. And I hate when people are like, we're going to get some things wrong. Yes, sure. That's not a permission to get it wrong, though.
Right.
Like,
it's not a permission to get it wrong.
Don't shout that as
such
like,
a
hey,
great
let's just
line.
like no. We work like towards Christ to look
Yeah.
like Christ. Christ never
Let's try
woke
to
up.
look like Jesus if we're going to talk about Jesus.
Yeah, Christ never woke up and was like, hey guys, I may get a couple things wrong today.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I follow the Father. I do what he tells me to do. Like,
Right.
like that's not your
Oh,
permission. Just like,
gosh.
hey, give us some grace. No. Grace will
Yeah.
come from the Father. I have forgiveness and kindness, and I extend grace, but it's not, your story is bad. My story is awful. There's beautiful moments with Jesus in it, and his church is going to be beautiful. Like, he promises us that he's going to make it beautiful.
Yeah.
It would be so cynical of me and to just believe that everywhere is terrible, because
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
And even like in some of the most terrible, even at the church I grew up at, I had beautiful encounters with God.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in other instances, God loves his kid more than he hates their sin. Yeah. And I've seen the Holy Spirit show up through people and in circumstances and in places where I'm like, I know what's happening behind the scenes here, but oh my gosh, his spirit is alive and active right now because he loves his kids.
Yeah, and I think it's such a beautiful thing to realize that when we're talking about how he loves his kids, it's not like he loves his kids and is okay with their bad behavior.
No.
It's in spite of what you do.
I'm saying, in spite of this person who I know, it's like, I know what's going behind the scenes, he loves these kids enough to where he's like, I'm not going to withhold from my kids because of your junk and your mess.
Right.
We're going to deal with it.
I mean, just even becoming a parent, and I've told this story before, but there were so many things with Justice, that I wanted to throw the book at him so bad, a couple times where I was like, when the Lord stepped in and said, "Can I discipline him?" I was like, "Yes, you can," because I was like, "Oh Lord, the Lord's gonna throw the book at that boy. He's gonna have me pull his phone. He's gonna have me pull because of the bad behavior," and the Lord ended up doing an act of mercy in place of that, which I wasn't for. There's a merciful God, but it wasn't about erasing the bad behavior. It was a merciful God showing his kindness to overthrow in the moment my kid's stupid little sin. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But I do think it's when we're talking about building trust again with houses of worship and what people would call institutions of religion, especially that's sometimes the verbiage that happens when people have been hurt in the church, and coming back to that, it's like, I don't think that God's like, well, it's a really sad thing. It's a shame you can't trust the church. I think that there's wisdom in being hesitant, especially with your storyline. But I do think that wisdom actually ends up becoming where the trust is rebuilt.
I agree.
Because when there's no wisdom, you just take it for face value. But when things happen, I think when things happen, it should ricochet in us this place of balance where we're like, we need wisdom to know, hey, what's really going on here? And I've said this before, I think in the Gateway, or maybe on the IHOP podcast that I did, it's not a place to walk into the church being like, so skeptical and on guard at all times. It's not, I don't think the Lord wants us like that, but I do think the Lord wants us to be very wise in like being very perceptive in, is the Spirit of God moving here? Is the kindness and the mercy of God in this place? Or can you feel him in the walls of this church? Because broken people, God will bring into broken places because that's the only place he's going to be able to show mercy.
Absolutely.
Or some kind of kindness. But I know there's probably a lot of victims and wounded people out there that'll say, I'll never trust the church again, for very great reasons.
Valid. But be shrewd as a viper, innocent as a dove.
Yeah.
You got the shrewd part down. Now let's find the innocence.
Let's find the innocence.
And I've prayed this before, and it was from Josh Morris. But it was Holy Spirit, would you restore my innocence?
Yeah.
And He will. He will.
Yeah.
And I probably pray it once or twice a year when I can feel myself getting into a place, my heart's feeling harder. It's like, would you restore my innocence? Yeah. And it allows you to have that childlike wonder again, walking into church and being like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. What a powerful, I think, note and gift to leave with an audience, especially those of you out there that are you've been victimized and re-victimized, and the church has not been kind. I think what a beautiful thing to ask the Lord to restore your innocence and to restore the overall picture of who God is and in the process of it, so that, man, all of us can journey to heal. Because, that's the goal. The goal here is to be the church he's writing back for. You know what I'm saying? It's like, wouldn't it be great if her dress was really white? Can we just have a white dress? Come on. Oh my God, put on some new shoes.
Please.
Please, good God. And I just think that it's why the Lord tarries. Yeah. Because he's like, oh God, she's got another hole in her gown. She's got another tattered thing. There's a black spot on the back side of her. And how kind of God to tarry. Yeah. So that we would maybe somehow get it right. And that people could be held accountable when they need to be held accountable. And yeah. So thanks, Tyler.
Thanks for letting me tell my story.
Thanks for being brave. I think it's just so incredibly, utterly brave of you to tell your story. Because, when you go up against a pretty big church, to say, hey, they did wrong. It's your right to say they did wrong. And it doesn't mean that you mean harm to a church. But I think it's, I'm just so proud of you. Thanks. Just so proud of you, kid.
Thanks.